The cold wind howled through the desolate landscape, a vast, unforgiving stretch of snow and ice. The sky above was gray and lifeless, mirroring the emptiness below. Everything in sight appeared to be swallowed by the harsh winter, leaving only the faint outlines of distant, snow-covered hills. The crunch of snow underfoot was the only sound breaking the eerie silence. As the protagonists trudged through the snow, their breath coming in heavy, visible clouds, they spotted something in the distance. At first, it appeared to be a mirage, a trick of the wind and the swirling snow. But as they drew closer, the figure became clearer. A woman collapsed against a fallen tree, her body slumped and fragile, barely holding on. She looked out of place in this desolate world, her blue skin and bright pink hair stark against the backdrop of the gray and white landscape. Her breath was shallow, each inhale seemingly a struggle. The protagonist paused for a moment, a shiver running down their spine. The woman was clearly not from around here. Her features were strange, alien, even, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and exhaustion. But what struck the protagonist most was the haunting expression on her face. She looked lost, vulnerable, and as if the weight of the world was pressing down on her fragile shoulders. As they approached, the woman stirred slightly, her eyes flicking up to meet the protagonist's. There was a flicker of confusion in her gaze, followed by a soft gasp. She made no effort to stand, her body too weak to do anything but tremble. Her clothes were tattered, barely enough to protect her from the cold. She was starving. There was no doubt about it. Her once vibrant skin seemed dull, her usual alien energy replaced by the emptiness of hunger and desperation. The protagonist hesitated, unsure of what to do. They had never encountered anyone like her before. Her appearance alone was enough to make them question whether this was even real. But the pained look in her eyes was undeniable. She needed help, and the protagonist knew they could not leave her like this. "Are you okay?" the protagonist asked, their voice cutting through the chilling air. The woman's lips parted, but no sound came out. She looked up at them, her eyes filled with an unreadable emotion. It was as though she was trying to form words, but her body could barely function enough to allow her to speak. The protagonist took a step forward, their hand instinctively reaching into the backpack they carried. They pulled out a ration pack, a simple, high-energy meal designed for long journeys through harsh environments. It was far from gourmet, but it was something, and in this moment, that was all that mattered. The woman's eyes followed the motion, and she blinked slowly as the protagonist approached her with the food. She was too weak to move, her body barely able to keep her upright. The protagonist knelt beside her, offering the small package of food. At first, the woman recoiled slightly, her gaze shifting from the food to the protagonist, as if unsure whether to trust the offer. The protagonist could feel the tension in the air, the weight of the decision heavy in the space between them. This alien, stranded in this frozen wilderness, looked at the food with a mixture of disbelief and desperation. It was the kind of look that conveyed the sheer magnitude of her need, the kind of look that made the protagonist's heart ache. "Please," the protagonist said softly, pushing the meal toward her. "It's all I have, but you can have it. You need it." The woman's hand shook as she reached for the food, her fingers trembling as if they hadn't worked properly in days. She paused for a moment, staring at the food as though it were something from another world. And then, without warning, she grabbed it with both hands and brought it to her lips. The first bite was slow, cautious, as if she couldn't quite believe it was real. But then something shifted in her expression. Her eyes closed briefly, as if savoring the taste, though it was clear from her haggard features that the meal wasn't just about nourishment. It was about survival. The protagonist watched her, helplessly unsure of what to say, as the woman took another bite, her movements growing more desperate. And then suddenly, the woman's entire demeanor changed. Her body, once so stiff and strained, softened as tears began to spill from her eyes. She dropped the food from her trembling hands, her face contorting with raw emotion. The protagonist was stunned. They had never seen someone, especially not an alien, react like this. The woman's sobs were quiet at first, but they grew louder, more guttural, as the realization of her survival hit her all at once. She collapsed forward, her face buried in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably. The protagonist froze, not knowing how to respond. This wasn't just hunger. It was a combination of physical and emotional collapse. This alien, lost and alone in a world far from her own, had been on the brink of giving up. And now, in this small act of kindness, something had changed. The protagonist's heart ached for her. In that moment, they realized that this wasn't just about offering food. It was about giving her hope, something she had likely lost a long time ago. The alien woman's sobs echoed in the cold, empty landscape, her body racked with emotion. She was no longer the proud, fierce alien from another world that had first caught the protagonist's attention. In that moment, she was simply a broken soul, overwhelmed by the kindness of a stranger. The food had been nothing more than a small gesture, a simple offering, yet it had brought her to her knees. The protagonist watched helplessly as the woman curled her body into itself, her shoulders shaking with each breath. Her sobs seemed to come from deep within her, as though the years of hardship, isolation, and survival had finally caught up with her. The sound of her anguish made the protagonist's heart ache. They had never seen anyone, human or alien, reduced to such a raw state. The cold, snow-filled landscape around them suddenly felt even more oppressive, the weight of the silence between them growing heavier. The protagonist gently placed a hand on her trembling shoulder, unsure of what to say. Words felt inadequate in a situation like this. How could they possibly understand what she was going through? How could they even begin to comprehend the loss, the hunger, the desperation she had experienced? But the woman didn't pull away. Instead, she slowly looked up, her eyes red from crying, her face streaked with tears. The intensity of her gaze was both heartbreaking and intense, a mixture of gratitude, grief, and disbelief. I never thought anyone would show me kindness, the alien woman whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. Her words were laced with sorrow, and the vulnerability in her voice took the protagonist by surprise. "You're not alone," the protagonist replied softly, though even they weren't sure they believed their own words. The universe was vast, and this alien woman, far from home, had wandered into an unknown world, possibly with no one to trust. How could they promise that she wasn't alone when they had no idea what her past had been like? But the woman shook her head slowly, her eyes distant as she stared at the ground. The tears that had previously streamed down her face had slowed, but they hadn't stopped. She was no longer sobbing uncontrollably, but the weight of her emotions was still clear. "I have no home left," she murmured, her voice quivering. "My people are gone. My planet destroyed." The alien woman's words hung in the air, thick with pain. She paused for a moment, her chest heaving as if the very act of speaking was an effort. "I was supposed to protect them," she continued, her voice now filled with anger and regret. "But I failed. I failed them all." The protagonist's heart sank as they listened to her confession. She had been a protector, someone who had carried the weight of an entire species on her shoulders. And now, all of that had been lost. In her eyes, the pain of her failure was written plainly, a burden so heavy that it had nearly broken her. She wasn't just starving for food, she was starving for purpose, for meaning. She had nothing left to hold on to, no family, no comrades, no home. The protagonist knelt beside her, offering the comfort of their presence, but words were elusive. What could they say to someone who had lost everything? How could they fill the void of her empty heart? It wasn't about the meal anymore. It was about the human connection, the brief moment where someone showed her care, something she had been deprived of for so long. "I never asked for this," the woman whispered again, her eyes locked onto the protagonist's, her expression raw with the weight of her words. "I never asked to be alone." Her voice cracked, and once again, she collapsed into a quiet sob. The protagonist's chest tightened as they watched her, This alien, so far from home, so deeply lost, and yet still capable of feeling such depth of emotion. It reminded them of how fragile life could be, how even the strongest could be brought to their knees by grief and hardship. This woman, with her otherworldly beauty and strength, was no different from anyone else who had suffered loss. Slowly, the protagonist reached out, placing a hand gently on her back in a comforting gesture. The woman's body stiffened slightly at first, as if unused to such tenderness. But then, as if she had nowhere else to go, she leaned into the touch, allowing herself to be comforted, if only for a brief moment. The snow continued to fall around them. But in this small, fragile moment, the cold seemed to recede. It was as though the universe itself had given them a brief reprieve, a quiet pause in which two beings, so different yet so similar, could find solace in each other's presence. "I'm sorry," the woman murmured again, her voice muffled by her tears. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't want to burden you." The protagonist shook their head gently, their voice filled with quiet conviction. "You're not a burden. You're not alone anymore." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the soft, steady fall of snow, wrapping the world in a soft, white blanket. It was as if time itself had slowed, allowing them to just exist in this space together. Two souls finding a brief connection in a vast, uncaring universe. The woman finally lifted her head, her tear-streaked face meeting the protagonist's gaze. For the first time since they had met, there was a glimmer of hope in her eyes. It was a small thing, a flicker of light in the darkness, but it was enough. The world around them may have been harsh and cold, but in that moment, they had found warmth in each other's presence. And for the first time in what felt like forever, the alien woman dared to believe that perhaps, just perhaps, she was not as alone as she had once thought. The quiet between them lingered, filled only with the soft sound of falling snow and the occasional sharp intake of breath from the alien woman. As her sobs gradually slowed, she began to collect herself, the weight of her grief still heavy, but now more contained. The protagonist watched her carefully, unsure of how to proceed, but sensing that she needed to talk, to share the truth of what had led her to this desolate, frozen landscape. The alien woman shifted slightly, pulling her legs closer to her body. Her eyes, once filled with hopelessness, now seemed clearer, though still clouded with sadness. She looked up at the protagonist, her expression a mixture of vulnerability and a strange resolve. There was a story she needed to tell, one that had been hidden behind the veil of her pain. Slowly, she began to speak. "I wasn't always like this," she said quietly, her voice still raspy from crying. "I came from a place far beyond this planet. My people, She paused, as if gathering the strength to continue. "We were once thriving. My world was beautiful, full of life. Our cities stretched into the sky, and we had the resources to explore the stars. We were known for our strength and knowledge. But we were also naive, too confident in our own power." The protagonist listened intently, leaning in closer, drawn to her words. They could sense the weight of the story she was about to tell. The alien woman's eyes grew distant as she spoke, her thoughts seemingly drifting back to a time long past, to a place where she had once felt safe, loved even. "We thought we were untouchable," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But we were wrong. We didn't see the danger until it was too late." The protagonist shifted, their expression softening with empathy. It was clear that this wasn't just a story of a lost alien. It was the story of a race that had fallen from grace, of a people who had paid the price for their arrogance. "It was the K'tal," the woman said, her voice hardening. "They came for us without warning, a ruthless race of conquerors, driven by greed and a lust for power. We were caught off guard. Our defenses failed. Our ships, our technology, our entire way of life, gone in an instant." The woman's hands shook as she spoke, her body tense with the memories of destruction. The protagonist could feel the anger and sorrow radiating from her, and they reached out once again, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away this time. Instead, she leaned into the touch, her eyes closing briefly as she collected herself. "They destroyed our cities," she continued, her voice growing steadier now, but still tinged with grief. "The Ketal didn't just invade us. They obliterated everything. They killed millions of my people, leaving nothing but ruins. And those of us who survived, we were scattered, lost in the vastness of space. I was one of the few to escape, but I was alone with the guilt of what happened." The silence that followed was suffocating. The protagonist could feel the weight of her words settle around them. This wasn't just about survival. This wasn't just about hunger or cold. This was about loss on a scale so vast, it was almost incomprehensible. "I was a soldier," she said quietly, her voice filled with shame. "I was supposed to protect my people, but I failed. I wasn't there when they needed me most. I couldn't save them. And now, I'm the last one left." The alien woman's eyes filled with tears once more, but this time they didn't fall. She blinked them back, trying to regain control of herself. The protagonist sat in stunned silence, their heart aching for her. To lose everything, her home, her people, her purpose, was a burden no one should have to carry. "But that's not the end," she said suddenly, her voice filled with determination. "I may have failed them, but I'm not going to let their memory die. I've been wandering the universe, looking for a way to fight back, to make sure that what happened to us never happens again. I've been searching for anyone, anything, that could help me. And then, I found this planet, Earth." The protagonist's eyebrows furrowed. "Earth?" they asked, surprised. The alien woman nodded, her eyes intense. "Yes, I've been studying your people. You're unlike any other species I've encountered. There's a fire within you, a drive to protect, to fight back against adversity. You've been tested, and yet you continue to stand strong. I believe that, together, we can stop the Ketal. I believe that through humanity, we can rise again." The revelation hit the protagonist hard. They had been caught up in the simplicity of offering food, but this was a mission, a quest far greater than they could have imagined. They had no idea what kind of impact their small act of kindness had set in motion. This woman, this alien, was not just a victim. She was a warrior, a survivor, and now she was seeking humanity's help to bring justice to her people. "Why me?" the protagonist asked, their voice barely a whisper. The alien woman looked at them, her eyes filled with gratitude and sorrow. "Because you showed me kindness. You gave me hope. And in this vast universe, hope is a powerful thing. I don't know if we'll succeed, but I know that together, we can make a difference." The protagonist didn't know what to say. They had come to this remote place, expecting nothing more than a solitary journey, and instead, they had found themselves caught in the middle of a galactic struggle. But as they looked into the alien woman's eyes, they felt something stir within them, a sense of duty, a desire to help. They had been given a glimpse into a universe far larger than their own, and now they couldn't turn away. "I'll help you," the protagonist said, their voice firm with conviction. "We'll fight together." And in that moment, a new bond was forged, one that transcended species, a bond born from shared purpose and the desire to right the wrongs of the past. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain, but one thing was clear. They were no longer just strangers in a strange world. They were allies, united by a common goal, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The wind had picked up again, swirling the snow into small, blinding whirlwinds around them. But within the small bubble of their shared warmth, the alien woman and the protagonist felt an unspoken connection, an understanding that hadn't been there before. The alien woman, once a lost soul wandering through the cold, empty void, was no longer alone. And the protagonist, having stumbled upon her in the most unlikely of places, felt a sense of purpose they had never known before. As they stood in the snow, The alien woman finally lifted her head, her eyes filled with a determination the protagonist had not seen before. She was no longer the broken, fragile creature she had been when they first met. She was stronger now, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally. The bond that had formed between them, however brief, had ignited a new fire within her. And now, for the first time in what seemed like forever, she allowed herself to truly believe that perhaps together they could find a way to stop the K'tal, the ruthless invaders who had destroyed everything she had once known. "I've never felt this way before," she said softly, her voice full of a quiet conviction. "For the first time in a long time, I believe there's hope." The protagonists smiled, their hearts swelling with a mixture of pride and relief. They had come into this journey expecting nothing more than solitude and survival. Instead, they had found purpose, something far greater than they could have imagined. In helping the alien woman, they had unknowingly become part of something bigger, a fight that spanned across galaxies. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making a difference, about standing up against an enemy that had devastated so many lives. And in that moment, the protagonist realized that perhaps this was why they had ended up here, in this desolate place, at the precise moment they had. The universe had a strange way of aligning events, and now they had a chance to right a wrong. The alien woman took a step forward, her gaze turning towards the horizon, where the frozen landscape stretched endlessly. It was as if she were seeing it for the first time, seeing it not as a symbol of despair, but as a world still worth fighting for. For so long, her vision had been clouded by the pain of loss. But now, the possibility of hope, of a future, was beginning to clear away the darkness. "We can rebuild," she said, almost to herself. "We can fight back. Together." The protagonist nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle in their chest. They had already made a promise to help her, but now it was more than that. It wasn't just about offering food or comfort. It was about taking a stand against an enemy that had taken everything from her, everything from her people. It was about fighting for the future. The alien woman turned back to face the protagonist, a slight smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "You've given me more than food," she said quietly. "You've given me a chance to fight again." The words struck the protagonist deeply. In a world full of chaos, where people often fought only for their own survival, they had forgotten that sometimes giving someone else a chance, offering them hope, was the most powerful thing they could do. And this was more than a chance. This was a future, a possibility, a reason to keep going. But the journey would not be easy. The K'tal were still out there, lurking in the dark corners of space, ready to strike again. And even if they succeeded in gathering allies and resources, the odds would always be stacked against them. But there was something different now, something that had changed within both of them. They were no longer just two strangers lost in the cold, fighting for survival. They were a team now. They had each other, and that made all the difference. "I don't know where this will take us," the protagonist said, their voice filled with resolve. "But I know we'll face it together. And no matter what happens, we won't stop fighting." The alien woman's eyes sparkled with gratitude, but also with a hint of something fiercer, something stronger. "No," she agreed, her voice steady. "We won't stop." For a moment, the two of them stood there in the snow, the weight of the future pressing down on their shoulders, but also lifting them up. The cold no longer felt so oppressive. The wind no longer felt so harsh. They were no longer alone. And that made all the difference. As they turned to leave, the alien woman glanced over her shoulder at the desolate landscape one final time. The snow continued to fall, but there was a shift in the air. It wasn't just the cold that was settling in. It was the sense that things were about to change. They had taken the first step. And with that step, the future seemed a little less bleak, a little more hopeful. They had a long road ahead of them. But no matter how difficult the journey might be, they knew one thing for sure. They weren't walking it alone anymore. And that was enough. The journey to fight the K'tal, to reclaim what was lost, had just begun. But the alien woman and the protagonist knew that as long as they had each other, there was nothing they couldn't face together. The future was uncertain, but with hope in their hearts and a shared mission, they were ready to take on whatever the universe had in store for them.